My name is Mark Urban Lorraine. I'm the Secretary of the Society for Scientific Exploration, who are hosting this session. Very interesting talks on measuring the biofield. And our next speaker is one that I've known Beverly for a long time. Dr. Beverly Rubik earned her PhD in biophysics at the University of California at Berkeley. Since then, she has published over 90 scientific papers and 2 books. From 92 to 94, she served as one of 18 advisors selected by Congress to the Office of Alternative Medicine, the precursor of the National Center for Integrative and Complementary Health at the National Institutes of Health. In 97, Dr. Rubik founded and became president of the Institute for Frontier Science, a 501c3 nonprofit laboratory in Emeryville, California. She's a leading scientist internationally known for her research program that goes beyond the mainstream and challenges the dominant biomedical paradigm. And it's my pleasure to welcome Beverly to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's really great to see so many of you interested today in biofield science. That's quite a switch for me, because I've been involved in this field for, well, over 40 years, in fact. Started looking at healer interactions back in the 1970s as a result of a personal experience. So today I'm going to talk about just a little piece of my research on biophoton emission, because I think it's a very viable way of addressing one of the biofield components. So just to tell you a little bit about my idea of the biofield, because it's unclear to me whether we all are on the same page on this. I think there are many different views on it. I wrote a theory paper back in 20 years ago, and a more recent paper on it. I see the biofield as an energy field with information both within and outside the body, composed of electromagnetic, acoustic fields, and possibly even subtler energy fields that have not yet been elucidated by conventional science. I consider the biofield the active organizing field of life, or this at least is a hypothesis, that can convey vital information central to the integration of the organism. And back when I introduced this notion, nobody understood what I meant by wireless biocommunication system, but today everybody does. So that's the good news. And I think that consciousness, intention, will, etc., can be the master of the biofield. So biophotons are just one component of the biofield, and we're talking here about the ultra-weak visible light between 400 and 700 nanometers that's emitted by all living organisms. And this was discovered over 100 years ago by Alexander Gurevich, who saw onions communicating somehow when they were in a paper bag together, and then he separated them chemically and realized it was an energy that could be blocked by quartz. In this case, it was an ultraviolet light that the onions were stimulating one another and, in fact, enhancing growth. So today we know there's also visible light, and that's what we're measuring, because there's many more visible photons than there are ultraviolet. But every time a cell divides, for example, in those onions, there's a photon emitted. And this is part of the emerging paradigm of looking at bioinformation and how these energies may be involved in both regulation and biocommunication. Now, it's certainly true that some of the emitted photons from organisms may be from free radical chemistry associated with oxidative stress, because the chemistry of oxygen does lead to a lot of free radicals. So one question is that's unresolved is how much of this energy is bioinformational and how much is noise associated with just free radical chemistry. And that question remains. I learned initially from Dr. Fritz Popp. I went to his laboratory 30 years ago to study what he was doing with biophoton emission, his apparatus and his experiments, and spent a summer there participating. And he wrote a book back in the late 1980s called Electromagnetic Bioinformation, a very profound phrase that really addresses biophotons, and investigated biocommunication in lower animals Drosophila, for example, and other organisms in water, but also later people. And he thought that he saw health as a coherent state marked by photon emission, and saw that disease could be a loss of coherence. And how did he look at coherence? He studied the kinetics of decay of biophoton emission. He not only studied the natural light from organisms, but he would shine a bright light on organisms and then look at the resultant bioluminescence and the decay kinetics, which could be hyperbolic or Gaussian. And one of those is coherent and one incoherent. So that's how he addressed coherence. I see some message here, but I couldn't read it all. So previous studies on humans found that the human hands emit perhaps the most light from our bodies, especially the palms of the hands and the fingertips, interestingly, because these are what we use in biofield therapies, such as Reiki, therapeutic touch, etc. And there's been a long history in philosophy of the hand bioenergy going back to 5,000-year-old Oriental medicine with the use of sword fingers and qigong, or to break up energy, to feel energy circulating. And so we have this principle from Oriental medicine: where the mind goes, the qi flows and the blood follows the qi. That really is the idea behind biofield therapy, for example, or health in general. And Theosophy produced this figure in the center showing the energy whorls from the fingertips, the minor chakra of the palm, and also of the wrist. So there is a long tradition. And what does the science say about this? Became my quest initially and exploratorily. So sword fingers are really a Taoist mudra with multiple purposes. This is just a not real light shown here from this man's hand, but a rendition of what a qigong master might produce. But this upper data on the upper right here really shows actual long-term exposures, not done by me, but by another laboratory, showing the forefinger and the middle finger are the greatest emitters from the hand. So let me tell you about an exploratory study that I did actually about 10 years ago on biofield practitioners treating patients and what we found. These were our research questions. Can we measure a change in biophoton emission from the hands of these practitioners and their patients? Actually, these patients were matched with them. They did not know one another in the study. And we looked at changes in emission before and after biofield therapy. We also looked to see whether we could measure any biophotons during biofield therapy. So our design was pretty simple. It's an outcome study with 5 different biofield practitioners of different traditions and even mixed modalities. I'll discuss them in a moment. And we chose pain patients and we matched them up. They never met each other before this experiment, and we measured them in pairs in 8 different energy therapy sessions. And so I participated in the dark counting chamber because I had to move the probe, the photomultiplier tube around on the bodies, and I had to blacken myself out, as you'll see. We also had post questionnaires to assess some subjective responses to the experiment. So here's the interior of the dark chamber. We have 3 stools for 3 persons. The chamber is painted black to prevent stray light from bouncing around. And we attached the photomultiplier tube onto a modified dental lamp, which of course can be placed, and it stays wherever you place it. It has many degrees of motion, so it's very handy to operate this sort of assembly in the dark. This has to be done in total darkness because the biophoton emission from the human body is on the order of photon counts per second. We use this commercial Hamamatsu photomultiplier tube with this number. It's a select one. It has the lowest dark count that you can purchase. and use without cooling, and that's very important. Of course, the photomultiplier tube works on the principle of the photoelectric effect, multiplying photons as electrons in circuits and then, of course, counting them. And this is the work of actually Albert Einstein, for which he received the Nobel Prize. So it's well accepted as a methodology. So here I am in the dark chamber with the door open, so you can see how I have to blacken myself out with a black mask, gloves, black outfits. We all wear black clothes in these chambers to prevent stray light from bouncing around, which would add to the signal coming from the body. And of course, we have to look at what goes on in darkness with the probe, with the photomultiplier tube, with no person in there. And we measured a dark count of 7 counts per second, or 7 photons per second. By the way, the aperture of the photomultiplier tube is about 22 millimeters in diameter. So that's slightly less than a square inch. And we're then measuring counts per second per, say, that area on the body. So here are my healer demographics for the 5 healers in the study, healer 1 through 5, ages between 43 and 78 years old, ethnicity, and their various modalities. Some of them had studied different modalities and developed their own methodology of delivering energy, and so they're called mixed, but we did have some delivering external qi and also Reiki. And you see the very advanced practitioners between 8 and over 40 years of experience. I asked them whether they were right or left-handed. We had 4 righties and 1 lefty. And I asked whether they thought the energy that they emit might be connected with light that we were going to measure, and there are their responses. We also looked at heart rate variability of the practitioners to see whether they were relaxed. And in most cases, they were a little bit anxious with these values, but a couple of them a little more relaxed with the lower low frequency to high frequency ratio. And on a questionnaire following the sessions, we found out that they felt relaxed, were definitely in a state of well-being, and most of them very satisfied with that the experiment went well and that they manifested energy. So the procedures inside the dark chamber with the human subjects were as follows. I was in there with them, and my colleague, as you'll see here, Javs, was outside. Even though we can buy a photomultiplier tube, you have to develop the electronics and your computer data acquisition for the data, and all of that is customized. You cannot go out and purchase it. We did 2-minute photon counts because earlier we determined with a calibrated light source that if you count for 2 minutes, the standard error of measurement would be less than 1 photon per second. So that's good. So that even a single photon difference from count to count or measurement to measurement would be significant in the study. And we also used 2 minutes baseline between each body measurement, whereby I placed the detector against the wall, the black wall, so it would read a dark count. And also, after we measured hands of practitioner and patient, we had the practitioner conduct a 20-minute treatment in their particular modality of the patient, not by placing hands on the patient, but just a short distance from the patient, while I moved the photomultiplier tube to the top of the interior, pointing downward to count any photons that might be associated with that treatment. And then we did 2-minute photon count of each body site once again in the hands, followed by a baseline, because the baseline slowly changes a little bit. After the session, which lasted maybe 30, 40 minutes, the subjects exited the chamber and then they completed questionnaires on relaxation, well-being, and satisfaction with the session to get a qualitative data dimension as well. So here's an example of a session, and I'm plotting photon count rate versus time in seconds. And you can see a little bit of a changing baseline, but because we're measuring baseline count every before and after every bodily measurement, then we can really calculate more precisely and subtract the baselines. So we looked at the healer palms, and we looked at patient palms, and then we had a healing session, and then once again, healer palms and patient palms in this particular run. What was interesting about this run was that we see three distinct, shall we say, outputs of light during the healing session of 20 minutes. And these correlated rather precisely with the healer's statements about their guides have arrived and they feel energy is flowing. So we felt that that was very significant. We had some healers who were totally silent, who did not discuss what was going on with them. And we had sessions that did not see light during the session. For example, here's a whole different thing where this healer was not emitting very much light at baseline. The patient, in fact, was emitting more, which was interesting. And the healing session was very, very quiet. And then we measured healer palms and patient palms once again. So all the sessions were unique. There was no correspondence from one to another, even when the same healers were utilized once again in subsequent sessions. So this is a summary of the data of photon counts per second per aperture of the photomultiplier tube for both healers and patients before and after the therapy. And you see, in general, we found that right hands emitted slightly more than left, but not always. There's some exceptions. And that's very interesting, I think, because it's consistent with Oriental philosophy that the right hand is more yang, more of an emitter, and the left hand is more yin, more of a receiver of energy. We did investigate the sword fingers of a couple of the healers who said they were qigong masters and they used the sword fingers in their healing modality. And we did see some of the highest emissions from the sword fingers, even higher than the palms of the hands from those particular healers. So that was interesting. So here are the mean values from all the healers before their healing session: 20.6 from the right palm, 18.8 from the left palm. The sword fingers, 43 and 31. And the patient palms, 28.8 from the right, 22.4 from the left. And following the healing session of 20 minutes, you can see that the values decreased somewhat. We don't know what that means, but that's what we saw. And remember, we're moving the probe around. We're not looking at coincidence of photon emission from patient and healer, but that would be very worthwhile investigating subsequently. And now we have two detectors, although we haven't done those experiments with, but we hope to. So conclusions from this study are that there are distinct differences in biophoton counts for persons that we saw, and this may relate to age, oxidative stress status, mind-body state, level of intention to emit, and just individual energy signatures, which we expect might be there, although we didn't look frequently enough over time to see if there were energy signatures. But using other equipment, we've seen this notion of an energy signature of a person. And we saw the biophoton emission of both healers and patients showed a slight decline after the energy healing. We found unique changes in time of biophoton emission during the energy therapy sessions, some of which correlated with healers' assertions or statements during the sessions. And the biophoton emission of the right-hand palms are consistently higher than the left in general, whether the subjects are right or left-handed. And the sword fingers are certainly the highest emitters that we found, and this is all consistent with ancient Oriental philosophy. So I want to go on to another experiment that we did, and these are just some case studies of two extraordinary practitioners. And the first one is a female, age 57, a medical intuitive, who claims she can open and close her third eye. And in fact, we measured, this is just a visual, it's not anybody really being measured because we always measure in total darkness, but we placed the probe with the cap off right over the third eye in the darkness. And we did a couple of trials where she closed and then opened her third eye, and we found a change in photon count immediately. And this one was doubled, 106% increase, and then the second trial was less, but still a 62% increase. So these are significant because, as I said, 1 photon per second is our standard error, less than 1 photon per second. So all of these values are significant, although we haven't done statistics, because putting subjects through this over and over and over again, this does wash out this effect. There's a fatigue effect. So biophoton emission in counts per second measured from the forehead of the subject in 2 trials, and she demonstrated some volitional control of her third eye, emitting between 62 and 106% more photons when she proclaimed that she opened her third eye. Whereas, data not shown here, the right hand palm, her heart region and abdomen did not show significant changes. So it seemed to be regionally specific to her task. And we had one more subject, an advanced practitioner associated with the International Academy of Consciousness. The website is there, who was doing some energy exercises in the IAC style and then directing loving energy from his heart. In this case, I have all the data to show you that initially and following his or during his energy exercise, we didn't see a change from the third eye. We didn't see much change, a slight change from the right palm, and the left palm again went down slightly. But we did see a profound change, an increase of 282% in photon emission from the heart region, which is really unusual because the heart region and, in fact, the other chakras tend not to emit much light. That is, the dantian, the lower dantian, the solar plexus and heart region emit very little light compared to the third eye or the hands. So this was a highly unusual result, and he was elated that we could see this energetically, that what he felt coming from his heart region. So, conclusions from the case studies on extraordinary practitioners. Some advanced practitioners can indeed direct energy with specificity using will and intent. We've measured this quantitatively as changes in biophoton count per second from specific bodily sites, whereas they were not associated with other bodily sites. So I want to talk a little bit about electrophotography. And this is a way of inducing light emission. It's not natural biophotons, but an induced emission using electricity, high voltage. And I don't think anyone else has discussed the biowheel, but Melinda mentioned it. And the older version of this, the gas discharge visualization camera. This is a device from Russia, from the developments of Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who invented it and really digitized, in fact, what we would call today Kirlian photography, using digital detectors, charge-coupled detectors inside this integrated circuit device. And his larger gas discharge visualization camera preceded this biowheel, which came out, say, about 6 years ago. There's the website. It also has accessories. Here's one called the Sputnik that can measure the energy of the environment and also relates to something about group energy, which is very interesting. I've done some experiments on it. So this is based on the corona discharge. When you electrify the fingertips, you get induced light emission, the Kirlian effect. And here you can actually see that light if you were to stick your head inside the biowheel. It's much larger than photon count of the natural light emitted from organisms. And the software associated with this device is really very extensive. And also here it's computer colorized, and we see the circle of light really emitted from each fingertip, 1L being the left thumb, 1R being the right thumb, down to the little fingers. This is just one example of data taken from a single subject. The Russians have studied a large database of people who are well and also sick, and have mapped various sectors of the finger emissions with various organ systems in the body. And that's all discussed within their software, and nothing is proprietary. In other words, the algorithm of these calculations has been fully revealed, which makes it a very interesting research tool. And I've had several doctoral students use it in their dissertations. And so there are these sector analyses that can be done and assignments to organs and tissues. I'm just going to tell you about one subject who, a female, 26 years old, who suffered from chronic pain and secondary depression, and what happened with her energy field before and after acupressure. So at baseline, this is just the middle finger image, you can see that it's not a very ideal image coming from the finger. Ideally would be a perfect circle of light with smooth edges, would be as if it were the smooth, unimpeded flow of qi. We would see that kind of conduction of the electricity and display of light. But you can see that it's quite aberrant. Some sectors are not hardly emitting. We also gave her a placebo. She didn't know that it was a placebo, of course, but we saw improvements, but we saw greater improvements post-acupressure. And, so it's clearly better than placebo, and that's good to know. Here is her composite biofield from BioWell. At baseline, this is all 10 fingers compiled together according to the software in BioWell. And post-placebo, we see improvements, more regularity, and less gaps in the biofield. And post-acupressure, we see a very healthy-looking biofield with some distortions, but no gaps. So that's an improvement. And we generally see that with energy medicine modalities, that we see energy improve right away. There are some other interesting variables calculated, again, completely transparent within the algorithms of the BioWell software. We can assess stress, which really has to do with the feathering or the fractality of the images, the finger light emissions. And so she went from a very stressful state to an improvement with placebo and a greater improvement with actual acupressure. And her energy levels went up. This is related to the area of the light emission. The balance has to do with the left-right emission coming from both hands being more symmetrical. Balanced energy emission and organ balance has to do with the distribution of energies related to those tissues that have been predetermined by the Russians. So we see improvements along the way. Placebo was better than baseline, her baseline state, and the energy therapy worked better than placebo, which is gratifying. And she felt better. So conclusions from such a case study using BioWell, we saw positive changes in the BioWell that were greater than placebo, and this is typical for practitioners who use BioWell or researchers. It's a useful device, I think, for measuring this particular aspect of an induced light emission. And we saw greater energy, we saw reduced stress, and more balance between right and left hand, all of which point to improved energy regulation following the energy medicine. The other side of the coin is how electromagnetic field stress can weaken and deform the biofield. So here's just one case to show you visually what can happen with an electrosensitive person who comes in and then spends 1 hour at my laboratory working at the computer, and we see a very distorted, uneven biofield, whereas she started out looking good. This is an electrosensitive person, but even persons who claim not to be electrosensitive show some dire changes in the biofield in various ways that I'm not going to go into. But let me move along and say what we're working on now in my laboratory, besides studying the influence of wireless communication radiation on the biofield and on the blood, is trying to develop other detectors for looking at other biofield components. And Harry Jabs put together this amazing array of sensors that we call the sensor suite. And it consists of environmental sensors such as alpha, beta, gamma detectors for nuclear radiation, temperature, earth magnetic field, air ionization. We have peripheral physiological detectors. Here this subject is wearing a galvanic skin response, and also blood perfusion. On the other hand, we've also looked at HRV. And then we have subtle energy detectors that we've developed. We look for a coupling between the subtle energy emission from healers, and we place these subtle energy detectors in Faraday cages, mu metal. They're totally isolated thermally, electromagnetically, and magnetically and electrically from all conventional energies, and yet we find some are detecting energies apparently associated with emission and also the physiology of the healer when they're relaxed and when they say they're going to emit energy. So we've been exploring these now for some time, and we've written one paper about it, and we've found some of our plasma-based detectors to be some of the best, and you can read our papers about that. So in conclusion of the last part here, the distinct changes in biophoton counts at specific body sites for a few advanced practitioners were in accordance with their intention to move energy to a certain site in their bodies. We believe that BioWell is a very useful instrument to measure induced light emission, electrically induced light emission from the fingertips, and can yield information about how energy medicine is acting therapeutically, as well as how things like electropollution can impact the biofield. BioWell shows positive changes in the biofield following energy therapies, such as acupressure, which I demonstrated, and negative changes in the biofield following exposure to electromagnetic pollution. And we have subtle energy detectors in development and some preliminary findings with practitioners that have been published. One of these things about this field is that it's moved so slowly in the last 40 years, sad for me. I had expected biofield science to blossom as soon as we brought this concept to the NIH 30 years ago. We expected, and there were some grants initially supporting this work, frontier medicine and biofield science, but there was no follow through. There is no concerted effort from the funding agencies to really bring biofield science to its full fruition. Sadly, we don't have that funding and we don't have that concerted effort. So we also know that these fields are very complex, they're dynamic, and they're extremely low level and make it difficult to measure. And I have long advocated for a sister project akin to the Human Energy Project, the Human Genome Project, whereby we would map the human energy field and really probe it via many detectors in a concerted effort with scientists worldwide. And I would still love that to happen, and I'd love to be part of it. So I'm putting that out in case any of you have resources or would like to participate. We should definitely stay in touch and see if we can put our heads together how to make that happen sooner than later. So I have some relevant publications to the work I discussed here, and you don't have to copy all of this now because you can find them on my websites under these websites /publications, and there is my email address. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Lots of questions stacking up here for you. And let me see. We're going to go here. What appears to be the most popular question is, how does your concept of biofields compare with Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphogenic fields?
Well, Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphogenic fields is really more non-local. You know, he's talking about the monkeys and the different islands who started to wash their potatoes. He's not really talking about something clearly associated with the body and the body-mind relationship that is measurable on the body or near it. And as far as I know, morphogenetic fields have never been measured, but it's a nice theory or hypothesis. I don't know that he's ever proposed how to measure it. So I don't see a clear relationship, actually. I certainly would say there is a non-local aspect of the biofield, but I've been involved in measuring local aspects. And for example, Reiki can be done locally with hands on the patient or hands near the patient, and it can be involved distant Reiki. And most of the biofield therapies have these dual ways of manifesting. So, but I think the data show that local healing has stronger effects than non-local, at least from meta-analyses that I remember.
Terrific. Thank you. Let's see. Dachi wants to know, do the photon counts always increase during the healing and drop at the conclusion of the healing session? Is there a state that the biophoton counts drop with the initiation of healing?
Well, we'd like to investigate things like that, and we need to set up two photomultiplier tubes. And if we did, we could have them running constantly. If we had three, then we could have one on the healer, one on the healee, and one on the session at large. We only have two, but I mean, these questions could be addressed with more funding and more, work to develop the apparatus to address them. But I don't know the answers to these. And I would say the sessions were all unique. The biophoton counts do not always increase during the healing session. Sometimes we saw none. And yet there was satisfaction with the session. The pain patient felt better and the healer felt energy was emitted. So whether we're actually measuring a component of energy healing remains questionable. And again, are there different healing modalities, which we did not compare in our study. We just looked at some advanced healers just to look for an effect. But what would it be like to compare Reiki to therapeutic touch to external qi healing and many more, pranic healing? I mean, there's so many of these, and I don't think they're all the same.
Which I'm going to use my privilege as host then to ask a question. You mentioned at the end that you had started off optimistic many years ago that with funding for complementary medicine that there would be resources for this, but it sort of dried up. What do you attribute that decline in funding interest?
Well, I think this whole field of energy healing, energy medicine, challenges the dominant biomedical paradigm. And, we have to understand that, in my opinion, our NIH, our HHS may be a captured agency. What do I mean by that? Captured by the industry being the pharmaceutical industry. If energy medicine worked, and I'm talking broadly about many types of energy medicine, not just biofield healing, but all the PEMF devices and phototherapy and all these things. Can you imagine how the profits of pharmaceutical industries may be affected? I think, quite frankly, they don't want energy medicine because it thwarts not just the paradigm, but the profits. And I've learned that it's not just an intellectual thing. It's really about money. It's about power and money. So it's bigger than just an intellectual confrontation of paradigms.
Right. Not just a scientific question. Let's see. Arlene wants to know what would be the baseline or background biofield / morphogenic field, which you've already distinguished it from, of, for example, an old oak forest. Has that been theorized or studied?
Not that I know of. That would be exciting. We did some studies on agriculture. We were funded to look at shumai agriculture, a specific type of organic agriculture developed by the Japanese using no manure in the compost. In other words, it was all plant-based. And interestingly, we found better results with cucumbers grown from that method than from organic agriculture with manure in the compost. That's all I can say right now. But we've never studied nature out there, and it would be hard to do. How do you bring these detectors to count single photons into total darkness in those forests? There is never total darkness because of starlight or moonlight.
Sure.
But it's an interesting question to take maybe samples from that forest and compare them to less virgin forests.
Interesting. Let's see. Dao Cheng and others want to know that if EEG is used to record the neurophysiological responses during the practicing, a time correlation or the onset of the biophoton change or intention change may be found. Any thoughts?
As far as I know, that has never been done, but it would certainly be useful to do. We should be correlating many physiological parameters. Try to do that though in a dark room. There's a lot of challenges to bring a lot more detectors into such a space. I guess we'd have to use wireless. And then what do we do about the effect of wireless? And I know EEG is now using wireless electrodes, but I wonder about the effects of that on subtle energy and on the brain itself. They use it medically, but whether it's appropriate for our type of experiments is another story. But all those wires, 19 electrodes or so, getting that out of the box, getting all that data collected, it's an ordeal to try to produce the apparatus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Can you define the meaning behind subtle energy?
Well, my definition of that is energy. It may not be subtle, but it has escaped detection so far by conventional science. So I'm not talking about something along the electromagnetic spectrum. I'm not talking about low-level biophotons. I'm talking about a distinct other type of energy or interaction with cosmic energy. It could be an interaction with ether. I mean, I'm a proponent of a neo-ether, and you can read my paper on that on my website, and think that there are interactions going on with that, or the zero-point energy interactions with that. And so we have precedent for that in our, shall we say, our fields of expertise and interest in this society, where we explore maybe interactions with zero-point energy.
Good. Oh, questions just keep coming in here. Let me see. Several people want to know if the biophoton effect washes out with repeated testing on individual healers. Does that suggest that each healer can only conduct one effective healing per day?
Well, since we don't know whether biophotons are really associated with energy healing for any particular modality, and this was just exploratory work that I presented, we cannot say that. And I think it's all dependent upon how patients feel and whether the healer feels they're doing good work. We have to go by the actual results of healing sessions, I think, rather than a measurement at this stage, at least in terms of biophotons.
Okay. Oh, let's see. Johanna wants to know, have you studied the photon count when a patient receives remote or distant energy healing, thus only the patient in the dark closet?
No, we didn't do that. That would be a very interesting experiment. Agreed. Or even a plant emitting light. Put a plant in the dark chamber and study the plant and focus energetically to shift the energy of the plant. All of these experiments could be done and are interesting, but our limitation is funding. And right now we've also moved on to studying the effects of wireless communication radiation on health, looking at the dire prospects of 5G being installed worldwide and with 100,000 emitting satellites. So that's what we've been focusing on the last few years.
Let's see. Bill wants Hamamatsu 736001 tubes versus extremely pricey APD detectors. I hope these are meaningful to you, Beverly. A note, some black clothing is only visible black unless carbon-based dyes. Under NIR cameras, it appears gray or white. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm only using a visible detector, so it doesn't matter what the near-infrared camera sees. Mm-hmm. My detector is not sensitive to near-infrared. I'm not familiar with an APD stands for, so I'll ask you to tell me.
Let me see, Bill. I'll invite you to the stage if you could maybe. Let's see how this works here. Waiting, he's joined the stage. There you are. Okay.
Yeah. APD detectors are they're avalanche photodetectors. Detect single photons reliably, so like you get like just a few photon counts. I just wondered if you'd been compared those against photomultipliers. The APDs, they're many thousands of dollars, and they'll have a chiller inside. So they're a cooled silicon detector.
Right, yes. I'm familiar with them now that I hear what you mean. I hear an echo. But we have not used them. They're very expensive. Our detectors, just the photomultiplier tubes, were about $2,600 each. And then you have to develop the electronics, and just the hardware to get it going is about $12,000 for a single detector that we put together. So I can imagine we would need many more thousands of dollars to move up to that type of detector, but it certainly would be worthwhile. And I applaud if you can do it. Please do.
George wants to know, have you shielded your PMT tube with, for example, a mu metal tube, I presume, as well as shielding the cables?
I think the cables are shielded. We haven't shielded the PMT with mu metal. So what are you concerned about? Magnetic fields interacting somehow with that? I would guess from your question.
Let me invite George to the stage and see what he can, see if this works here. He's joined the stage, but I'm not seeing him. Can you open your mic, George? I guess that's not working. I apologize. Oh, no, here he comes.
Hi, Beverly. Yes, I'm concerned about the possibility that there are ambient fields that might affect the PMT and the high voltage diodes, etc., that are required right next to the end of the tube, and wondering whether you have considered that mu metal or other kinds of shielding might be of benefit to reduce the possibility of artifact.
Well, that's interesting. And we certainly have some mu metal sitting around. So next time I do any of this, I can wrap it around the PMT. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Okay, let's see. Lisa, might it be an equilibrium phenomena between healer-healee rather than directional flow?
It could well be. It's an interaction. And I don't know if it's a directional flow. We always think about that. But maybe we should be thinking about an interaction with the ether, rather than a flow from healer to healee. But people experience a flow. The healers do experience this. Maybe Melinda would say more. She's both scientist and healer. But the feeling of flow is a real perception, I think. Feeling Reiki, experiencing it, you do feel energy entering. You feel tingling. You feel some change. And the healer experiences a flow. So that's why we use this language sometimes. But that may not be really what's operating. So we should be careful as we think about this whole area, that we don't exclude possible mechanisms of action or modus operandi.
Mm-hmm. Lee wants to know if you measure the healer's body temperature during the experiment as well to separate the effect of black body radiation. If not, couldn't all the biophoton emissions be explained by changes in circulation and therefore temperature in the fingers?
Well, we haven't measured the healer's body temperature. I wouldn't call this black body radiation, but we could explore the circulation in the fingers with the devices that measure. We have those devices that measure flow, blood flow in the hands. We haven't probed that further. It's very hard to get things in and out of this dark box without putting holes in it and getting light leaks and then setting up all the ways to monitor patients. So these are really just exploratory studies that we did, and now we realize we really want more photomultiplier tubes to address questions of the cross correlation between healer and healee in their emission patterns. we felt that would be the next thing we wanted to add, and therefore we purchased the second photomultiplier tube.
Okay. Can BioWell detect changes in the field after taking normal chemical drugs? Can it be the indication if drugs are beneficial for that person?
I haven't done that experiment, but I have done a similar thing. BioWell has an accessory called BioGlove. It's a conductive glove, like a silver mesh you put on one hand, and that's attached, and you then get a data point every second from the whole biofield. And you can bring substances near the person wearing the BioGlove and take a look at how the energy field changes in response to, say, the homeopathic drug, or the nutritional substance, or the pharmaceutical drug, and thereby get an idea whether that particular substance would shift the biofield in a positive direction or de-energize a person. So I haven't used it in that regard, but I know practitioners who do.
Interesting. Interesting that the IACS and the heart measure practitioners such as Purnam and Suzanne Baer's heart medicine.
It's a great idea. I agree. I haven't done it.
Further research warranted.
Yes.
Indeed. All right, let's see. We got a couple more minutes here. Good. Another question just came in from Margaret. Do real eyes emit biophotons? Can clients sense if the healer is emitting light?
That's a great question, too, and we haven't done it. But certainly the probe could be put quite close to the eye, and we could look eyes open, eyes closed, and easily answer that research question. So you see, there's a lot of interesting questions once you get your biophoton experimental setup that you can go and do, and I hope you will.
Good. And how about the clients sensing if the healer is emitting light? Is that part of your follow-up to determine if they sense that?
Well, we could have asked that question, I suppose. We were just looking for a satisfactory outcome of the session.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a worthwhile question to add to our questionnaire.
Good. All right. Any further questions people want to post in here? We have another 5 minutes or so roughly available. Otherwise, if we see no more questions, we will want to thank Beverly very much for a wonderful talk and very interesting conversations. Are you available, Beverly? Oh, wait, we got another one, Bill, coming in here. We'll get this one before I get to Bill's question. Will you be available to stick around in the social lounge afterwards?
Yes, I'll figure out where to go and do that. Thank you.
Okay. I think you'll get put out there where you'll see the tables, and then you can join the table.
Okay, the table, right. Mm-hmm.
All right. Right now, Bill wants to know what if from PMT to PC. I don't know what if.
What does that mean?
I don't know what that means. I guess, Bill, we're not clear. Can you compose your question a little bit? What interface?
Oh, interface. Oh.
Okay. Sure.
You know, I'm sorry I don't know the answer to the question offhand, but I have to say in our paper we described in great detail our apparatus and the computer data acquisition. So you can read it in the journal, and the website has my paper. You can click on it.
Terrific.
You can go to brubik.com/publications, scroll down to the biophoton paper.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you all. Let's all give Beverly a warm round of applause with your icons out there. And we hope to see everybody join us in the social lounge here. Thank you.